Now that Total Warhammer 3 has been out for a while, with the reception being as good as it was, you might want to get out of the literal hellhole of 3 and maybe chill out back in Warhammer 2 or even Warhammer 1, especially if you're a new player to this specific part of the Total War franchise. Mortal and Immortal Empires probably destroy first-time players in the series when they're looked upon, like looking upon the face of Tzeentch himself and losing every single shred of sanity you've ever had. So let's take a quick look back on Warhammer 1 and 2 too, why not? Now, I won't be going in depth into every single faction in the game, some mad lad already did that for 2 plus Mortal Empires and 3 as well, so let's try and roleplay a bit as someone who has just discovered the series and wants to start at the very beginning, Warhammer 1, released all the way back in 2016.
Gods are cruel, and we are their playthings.
First of all, the DLC is relatively limited. Warhammer 2 did come out just a year after 1, so there simply wasn't that big of a window for Creative Assembly to pump out those DLC in the first place. But the DLC that is here is very bad. Let's instead look at the vanilla campaign first, that would be a bit better. The vanilla out-of-the-box game has 4 playable races, plus Bretonnia, which is free LC. Some of them with different factions for different leaders, but mostly a singular faction per race with a different legendary lord to choose, giving a bit of variety per campaign. We can already see in the Warhammer 1 DLC factions that CA has tried to get rid of that though, giving almost every legendary lord since their own unique faction, which is a much better feeling aspect to the game than always having the exact same start every single campaign with the same race, except for like 3 starting units being different, and your poop and farter units doing 10% more damage to piston shitters instead of common panzers, or your giga shitters costing 20% less upkeep for your legendary lord's army only, of course. They're still working on this problem even now, with the ongoing development of Immortal Empires, with the best example being Volkmar the Grim getting his own faction all the way in the Southlands. In any case, there's at least some variety here. Presumably most people would gravitate to the Empire for their first playthrough, them being human and having a very diverse roster to boot, having a unit of almost any type, except monsters or monsters infantry, as well as lacking any flying units, but having access to a very wide selection of magic. Dwarves are also quite vanilla and give you more of an Empire Total War feeling, what with all the cannons and gunfire, though their roster is less diverse than the Empire's, not even having any cavalry to speak of. Greenskins are also pretty vanilla, with a larger focus on melee units and having some real big MFs too. Vampire Counts is where it gets interesting, because they lack any form of ranged units, instead having some very mobile monsters and flying menaces too, which makes them feel even more restrictive than the dwarves in some ways. Depends on your playstyle, I suppose. And lastly, the free LC faction of Bretonnia is entirely focused on heavy cavalry, also having heavy flying cavalry, though they only have some basic infantry, but great siege weapons too, as well as some really good archers as well. All in all, a pretty decent lineup, and this definitely can be a lot of fun for quite a long time if you want to play, say, a campaign with every single faction or every single legendary lord. That is, if you don't care about some of the bugs, performance issues or other general problems you may encounter, because they will never ever be fixed. Now, before we get knee deep into the shitfest that is the DLC, let's talk a bit about the pricing of the base game first. Full price, this game, the first in its trilogy, released 6 years ago, costs a whopping €60 or equivalent, which is like $60 USD. This is full AAA quality dosh. The God of War port on Steam costs less than that at full price. Both Warhammer 2 and 3 cost the same base amount, which is a bit weird because you'd assume the first entry into a series would cost a bit less if there's already 2 sequels. Then, when we look at the DLC pricing for a 6-year-old game, it's €19 for Beastmen and another 19 for Wood Elves as new factions to play, including a little mini-campaign, $10 for Norska, and 8 for Chaos Warriors, which were, I believe, the original pre-order bonus race. Then, we have the Lord Packs trademarked copyright, which add new units and a legendary lord to usually 2 opposing factions. Also including regiments of renown, which are elite unique variants on existing units. That's 1 Lord Pack for the Empire plus Vampire accounts, and 1 for the Dwarves plus the Greenskins, both being €9 each. And to top it all off, we also have the Blood Pack DLC, Blood for the Blood God. Without it, you get no blood whatsoever in battle. Enemies don't get gibbed or beheaded or lose any limbs or anything cool like that. That's €3 on top of that. So, in total, at full price on Steam, the DLC alone costs around €77, almost 80. This means that to enjoy the complete Total Warhammer 1 experience with all optional content at full price, you are expected to cough up almost €140. This is a lot of money. And the big question is this worth it? Is Warhammer 1 as a game and its DLC enjoyable enough to warrant this price point still? Especially considering 2 and 3 are out and about, with Mortal Empires and the upcoming Immortal Empires not being accessible through solely Warhammer 1 alone. No, not at all. I mean, sure, Warhammer 1, it's a fun game, but especially coming from the state Warhammer 2 is in, Warhammer 1 clearly feels like a downgrade on all aspects. Which is also a testament to the quality 2 is at right now, of course, but this means that first-time players have this huge wall in front of them. Honestly, I think it's almost predatory to still keep these base prices so high. The only reason they are still so high is, of course, Mortal Empires. People who play 2 and want to play with the cool, modern, remade Beastmen or Wood Elves need those DLCs from 1 to get all the lords from 1 and to have the full Beastmen or Wood Elf experience, so to speak. Empire players wanting the full experience need Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2, the Grim and the Grave and the Hunter and the Wanderer DLC packs for all lords, units, faction mechanics and regiments of renown. Now, if you haven't played any Total War Warhammer game before, this is no big deal. Like I said, if you want to roleplay as someone who hasn't played any of the games, just jumping into 1 is a good starting point. 1 is still serviceable as a game, especially getting it on sale, like with the recent Steam Summer Sale. Getting the vanilla game for $15 would definitely be worth it. On sale with all the DLC, so the entire package, is $55 instead of $140, which is less than the full price of the base game alone, getting it on sale with all the DLC, so then it's a good deal. In any case, it's a cool fantasy Total War game. If you're a fan of the Total War franchise and you haven't played the Warhammer Total Wars, but you're a fan of fantasy games as well, you'll definitely like it. Sure, the game has some issues, and playing it again for this video really shines a light on all the issues 1 still has over 2. Stuff like relatively bad performance, annoying camera movements, a lot of quality of life changes not being here, like not being able to see settlement resources on just the general map. You have to zoom out all the way to strategic view for that. There's also no way whatsoever to see settlements with unique buildings, which 2 started doing with the little monoliths you could see, which was a very welcome addition, because usually settlements with unique buildings are prime real estate. One of the weirdest and possibly most annoying things 1 does different though is how settlements are handled. In 2, regions have climates, and your race determines which climates are suitable for you or which ones are not, with penalties for unsuitable climate settlements and larger penalties for uninhabitable climate settlements. It all makes sense, but this means you can settle literally every single region. In 1, you can only settle in regions of your race. As a human faction like Bretonnia or the Empire, you can't settle in mountains because those are for dwarves and greenskins. This makes it very annoying to keep control of regions you can't settle, since a single enemy army slipping through your defenses can just settle those regions behind your back. Aside from these specific issues, 1 also has a general lack of depth after playing it for a while, especially in faction mechanics, which 2 has improved upon immensely. But in the end, 1 is still a serviceable game. It's not bad, but it is quite mid. One big gripe here is of course the state of the DLC, which is isolated in just Warhammer 1. The Beastmen DLC especially are in an abysmal state in 1, and the Beastmen have been known as the worst race and the worst campaign to play all the way up until the recent remake, so it simply isn't worth it to get Beastmen solely to play them in 1, unless you want to squeeze out every drop of content from 1 first, before moving over to 2 or something along those lines, which I wouldn't recommend necessarily. Now, the real kicker is that, of course, Warhammer 2 and 3 exist, like I've already said. At the moment, 3 is kind of out of the picture, since Immortal Empires hasn't dropped just yet, and 3 on its own has its own fair share of issues that they're steadily working away at, but it still has some issues. But Warhammer 2 is where it gets a bit evil. Warhammer 2 itself as a game, so without Mortal Empires, is also serviceable. The Vortex campaign isn't for everyone, but it's something new, it's something special, it's fun, you know, it's new factions or whatever. It's not a bad game on its own. It feels smoother to play than 1, has in general better performance, better UI, and in general just feels like an upgrade to 1. You know, it plays smoother and whatever, which of course makes sense, it being a sequel and all. Mortal Empires kind of fucks everything up though. Mortal Empires, by the way, I know I've mentioned it before, but if you're not aware what it is, it's essentially the porting over of the entirety of Warhammer 1 into Warhammer 2. So you can play with all the races of 1 in 2 and even get a bigger map to play around in as well, with all of the same factions and DLC factions, which then, you know, got updated over time. Immortal Empires is gonna be the same thing, with both Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 content being playable in Warhammer 3 on a giant worldwide map, which is what everyone is looking forward to at the moment, of course. Then, after the DLC for 2 started rolling out, DLC and updates for 2 started including the original races from 1. Now, I'm sure you've seen the Manlore video on Warhammer 2, and when he said about the Empire rework, that you could just boot up Warhammer 1 and check it out for yourself, he wasn't lying. Because why would CA put in the effort of retroactively updating an old game with a different code and engine architecture most likely, if everyone who the update is relevant for has both games already, right? This means that, in summary, Warhammer 1 is literally abandoned. Any issues you have with specific races in 1 that get fixed in 2, that's great. Please buy 1, 2, the specific DLC from 2, and if it's a DLC race from 1, please buy that pack too. Oh, what's that? That would cost you like $150 at full price? Sucks to suck, poor fag. Now, assuming Immortal Empires will work in much the same way as Mortal Empires does, 3 will get DLC over time, adding new races unique to 3, most likely the Chaos Dwarves, and Nippon or Araby or some barely remembered race mentioned in one sentence in the 3rd edition lore book or something. I don't know, I'm not a nerd. At some point, there will come DLC updating races from 1 and or 2, and most likely update DLC races from 2 as well, the Tomb Kings or the Vampire Coast. Both DLC races in 2 are in a very good spot though, as far as I'm aware at least. So I doubt it would be as big of a change as the Beastmen got or even the Greenskins got, but still. Now, as you've probably noticed, this is a very big tangled mess of DLC on DLC. And simply saying I want it all is very simple, it just costs a lot of money. So for the final tally, just for fun, how much money would you have to spend to get all relevant DLC for the upcoming Immortal Empires beta release in August? The grand total of 376.8 euros or dollars for the entire package. At that point, there's nothing left for you to wonder about getting the full experience, except maybe activating all the free DLC through the Total War Access system, which is a bit of a mess. Now, I myself am a believer of the X amount of currency per hour is a good spend when it comes to video games. That's not the only value a game can have, of course. I've played games that cost $60 for 10 hours, felt like I got my money's worth. But anyways, I mentioned this to answer the question, is this worth your money? In my opinion, even though I've shit on the way they monetize it and how much it costs in total, in my opinion, most likely, yes, it is worth your money, even at full price. I've got about 400 hours into the series as a whole, mostly playing Mortal Empires in 2 of course, getting most of the content on sale. I think maybe 200 euros in total I spent on it. And I don't think I've been robbed or anything, but it is still a huge paywall to overcome. Mortal Empires being the main draw to the series as a whole, you need to have both base games at least, which is 120 bucks at full price, just to see whether or not you even like it in the first place. Now, I'm obviously not stupid, so I understand why DLC exists and why it costs money, and the massive amounts of updates CA has done throughout the lifespan of 2 looks to me like the money they made off of these DLCs definitely went to a good place. Sadly, with the Warhammer 3 launch seemingly being as rushed as it was, they lost a lot of goodwill, which may result in Warhammer 3 not getting the love it deserves in the long run. Warhammer 2 has had updates for about 4 years, it launching in September of 2017, and the last DLC dropping in July of 2021. So I'd expect at least the same amount of care and effort put into Warhammer 3, but only time will tell, of course. So, to conclude the video, getting into Total War Warhammer right now from zero asks a lot of money and trust. Getting everything at full price at once, I would not recommend at all. But getting 1 and 2 on sale, trying out Mortal Empires to see how you like it, sounds like the best entry point at the moment. This will likely change in the future, depending on how Warhammer 3 and Immortal Empires evolves over time, and whether or not the presence of Cathay results in a similar fate for Warhammer 3 as it did for 3 Kingdoms. In any case, whether you played the games already, or you're waiting for the perfect sale to jump in, I hope you have fun with it, and I hope I'll continue to have fun with it as well. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.